Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Pillars to Success with Dr. Paul White. How are you doing today, Dr. White?
I am great.
So, today we wanted to emphasize the idea of accountability because it is such an important part, obviously, within our self-growth. So, first and foremost, I want to go ahead and ask you, what does accountability mean to you?
I believe, at least for me, accountability is profound acceptance. And you might ask, well, what's profound acceptance? I feel that in our lives we exhibit tendencies, traits, idiosyncrasies, personality quirks, whatever you might want to call them, that we don't necessarily see. Other people may see them, but we don't always necessarily see them. And we also make mistakes sometimes that we may not even fully recognize as a mistake, or at least not maybe see it with the same weight as someone else would. I think taking accountability is really at the root of it, of course, being self-reflective, right? Doing a self-assessment, but also trying to maybe look at ourselves the way other people see us. I think that if I were to kind of give an overall assessment, I believe that's what true accountability is.
Now, some people don't see the fault in their actions, and for them, they don't really think the idea of accountability is necessary, because they didn't do anything wrong. How do you feel about that?
Well, the problem with that is so if you choose not to look at an action or a tendency that you have that may have harmed someone else or hurt someone else in some way, or maybe even harmed or hurt yourself, you're never going to change it. I feel that on the road to success, on the road to self-improvement, there is a major roadblock, and that roadblock is accepting accountability. So I feel that in order for us to move forward, to basically to improve our circumstances, we have to do that assessment that I've talked about, that self-assessment, and then accept accountability for past actions, for things that we may currently be doing as well. So I think those two things have to be factored in. And again, I think that we don't always see the way that we are. Sometimes we don't even maybe notice something that we do that might affect somebody else. So I feel that, having that empathy and putting ourselves in another person's shoes and trying to see ourselves the way other people see us goes a long way into, accepting accountability for our actions.
Do you feel like a lack of accountability is a large issue in society?
Yes, it's a growing issue. And unfortunately, because it's a growing issue, there's more and more individuals that aren't looking at their lives in an objective way. They're not doing that self-assessment, so they're not making the necessary changes to become better versions of themselves, or ultimately the best version of themselves. So I think that on a collective societal level, that's a real problem, and it's one that we should all be concerned about. But again, as I've stated before, we should really be most concerned about ourselves and, staying in our own lane and on this journey to self-discovery and self-improvement, really focusing on areas that we can improve upon. And again, at the core of that is accountability and accepting, the consequences that come with accountability.
Can you give an example of a time in your life when you feel like you may have been in denial and you didn't feel like taking accountability?
Yes. So I grew up in a family where individuals yelled a lot. A lot of the emotions were very, very vocal. They were out there on display for everybody to see. So that was normalized for me. That was my modeling, If you get mad, you just yell about it, And so this is what I was stating earlier. Sometimes we don't necessarily recognize what we're doing is wrong because it was normalized for us. It was modeled for us. And sometimes it takes time for us to realize, oh, wait a second, this isn't the best approach. Maybe I'm, stepping on someone else's toes. Maybe I'm making them feel bad. I'm not meaning to, again, this is the way things are modeled for me. This is what love looked like, and so I feel that the more we self-assess, the more we start understanding how our actions affect other people, the more cognizant we become of, our own personal accountability. And so I feel that once we do that, we can start making those changes. So in my personal situation, that's what happened. I would have a tendency to be upset about something and yell about it, not realizing that's not an effective way to approach, an issue or a challenge, maybe interpersonally between in a relationship or a friendship. There are better approaches to that, and so I had to take accountability for my actions. I had to start realizing, hey, I can't be yelling just because I'm upset about something. I have to find a better way, a better approach to this. And the only way I could have done that is by doing that self-assessment and trying to look deeply into myself and understand the mechanisms behind some of the things that I do.
Do you think there is such thing as taking accountability too far and it could actually look more like self-sabotage?
Yes, I believe that some people will turn it into guilt. And you got to be careful with guilt because we all do things that we're not proud of, right? We all, sometimes traverse down a road that we wish we hadn't. We look back and go, I would have made some changes, I would have done things differently. And we maybe have, actual guilt, shame, or a combination of the both. I think that it's appropriate to feel guilt at times for our actions. As I said, as I started becoming more aware that yelling and being, maybe more verbose with some of my emotions wasn't always the most productive way of doing things. As I started becoming more aware of that, I started, making more changes and such in that way. So I feel that, guilt was appropriate sometimes with that. It helped me make the necessary changes to improve and make some improvements, in those areas. But you can take it too far, and sometimes people will dwell too much on things. They'll take almost on too much accountability. And again, you have to give yourself grace. You have to give yourself love. Listen, most of us are doing the very best we can with what we have. Most of us had things modeled for us in a very specific way. We had programming that was done in very specific ways as well that we are trying to work through. And we're trying to figure out what parts of that programming were appropriate and worked well, and other parts maybe weren't as effective and didn't work well. And so, we got to give ourselves grace. We have to give ourselves, the necessary forgiveness. And again, that's not giving yourself a carte blanche to go out and do whatever you want to do, but it's just recognizing that you're human, you make mistakes, that your prior programming has a huge influence on your actions, and that it takes time to move that needle, and that you have to be patient and give yourself love. And it's never good to dwell too far and into guilt and to dwell too much on the negative things that you've done in your life.
Do you feel like in every exchange, whether it be social or just an energy exchange in general, there is some level of accountability that someone needs to take?
Of course. I believe that most of us, when we cause something that may not gel well with us or another person, it's not done maliciously, it's not done on purpose. I feel that most of the mistakes we make in life, most of the selfish things that we do sometimes, we aren't necessarily, again, thinking of the other person in an ostensible way that we're trying to hurt them or hurt their feelings. Most of it, again, comes down to our prior training, comes to that programming, comes to what was modeled for us. And again, that was normalized. And so when something's normalized, it's going to take time for us to see it as, that's maybe not the best way to approach that. Maybe there's a better way of doing that. So again, giving yourself that grace, like I stated earlier, and understanding that it's going to take time, and we have to be patient with ourselves, and we have to be careful how we approach it. And not all things in life are always, black and white. There are various shades of gray, especially as you get older, you start really recognizing this. And, but I think the good news here is this, is that, as I stated earlier, having accountability, accepting that into your life, will allow you to make those positive changes and to move the needle in the right direction.
Do you believe people who lack accountability would be considered selfish?
You could make that inference that that they're selfish, but maybe not in the way that we're all thinking. I think it's a form of self-sabotage. So it's obviously hurting the people around us, right? It's hurting, externally it's hurting people, but I believe it does more damage to the person, that's not accepting the accountability. Because really when you refuse to accept accountability, you have completely bought into the programming, into the modeling that you received. And you're basically stating that there's no room for improvement. There's no need for modification. And that's kind of a sad place to be. And you are being selfish to yourself. You're not allowing yourself to make the changes, to make the necessary changes to become a better version of yourself, to become a happier, more productive, effective version of yourself. You're choosing to stay in this hellscape. You're not allowing yourself to grow and to bloom. And so I think that's the sad part about it. And so it is a selfish act. And again, a certain amount of that, of course, is external to within our interpersonal relationships and friendships and family around us. But I think the biggest person it hurts is ourselves.
Would you say that self-improvement and accountability go hand in hand?
They are like twins. You cannot have one without the other. Accountability is the end result of an assessment. So we all have to do personal assessments from time to time. And some people are really good at assessing other people, but that doesn't help us. The only way we can really help ourselves is by doing a self-assessment. And so the self-assessment comes essentially before the accountability. So once we actually look deep into ourselves and we look at areas of our lives to improve, areas maybe that where the modeling and the programming were not great, or maybe just completely ineffective, we can then start to create a plan. So I think that accountability is that integral part. So doing the self-assessment and then basically saying, okay, yes, these are areas that I need to improve. These are areas where I've made mistakes. These are areas where I've tripped and I've fallen and I've blundered. These are my idiosyncrasies. These are areas that I can modify, that I can improve. And then of course then after that is action. But you have to have the accountability part of that. And so yes, accountability and becoming a better version of yourself are twins. They go hand in hand.
Thank you so much for your time, as always, Dr. White. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us. And as always, we are going to finish up with one final question, and that is going to be, if you were talking to somebody who struggled with taking accountability and struggled with the idea of taking accountability, what would you say to them?
The first thing I would say is humble yourself. It's important. Check your ego, okay? And then I would talk with friends and family. I would talk with the people closest to you, people around you, people at work. And I would ask them some honest questions. I would ask them how they perceived you. And tell them to be honest. Tell them to be brutally honest. Tell them to give you some, some constructive criticism, if you may. That's a good place to start. You want to see yourself or you want to understand how other people see you. I think that is very, very key because I think sometimes that's something that we miss. So I think that's a good place to start. Try to start understanding how you are seen by others, how you treat others, the way you represent yourself to others. And then once you have a good bead on that and you've done some self-assessment, you're looking through and doing an inventory of yourself and your life, then start accepting the accountability.